when you think of Renny Harlin, you've made so many massive movies and so successful in a lot of the movies you made, but you have a lot of ties to horror. I mean, you've made a lot of horror movies, from Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and Deep Blue Sea and Devil's Peak. Was it Devil's Peak?
That was
Um,
fast.
Devil's, yeah, and then now with The Stranger, you've made quite a few horror movies. Obviously, you're a fan of the genre.
Yeah, I blame my mother because she took me to the movies. I was her date since I was just a little kid, and so I was like 6 or 7 or 8 when I saw Rosemary's Baby with her, and I saw Psycho with her, and a lot of Hitchcock movies, and so I really grew up watching like really good horror films, and somehow it just became part of my imagination and my psyche in some way. I don't know if I was just damaged for life by that, but I always felt like it was a richness, and so I loved horror literature and comic books and movies, and it was just felt like a natural way. Then when I got into movie making, my very first movie was a little action movie, but then when I came to America, my very first American movie was a very low budget horror film called Prison, but it felt very natural. Also, like I always like feel like I've always had my approach to movie making starts from the visuals. I'm very like into designing the camera angles and the lighting and everything, and trying to put the audience into the driver's seat, putting them into the movie with the characters. And I feel like, and it applies of course to action movies also, but particularly in horror, I feel like you can really lead the audience with the visuals, with the camera, and like in The Strangers, for example, it's really about the camera placement, how you can increase the tension and the dread and the false sense of safety or false sense of danger.
So you mentioned Prison, and then basically after that, I would assume your first big break, if we want to call it that, was Nightmare on Elm Street 4. This is kind of Freddy and the franchise almost at the peak of it. Fairly big budget movie. How did you get that gig, and how did you handle your first, multi-million-dollar budgeted movie like this?
That was a tough one. I had seen the first Nightmare in London, actually, when I was in post production of my very first movie, and I was really blown away by it. And then when I heard about the fact that they were making the fourth one, I threw my hat in the ring, and they were basically like, "Who the hell are you?"
Right.
And I didn't even have an agent. I had made my first movie, Born American, and then my first horror movie, Prison, but I couldn't even get an agent in Hollywood. So I was a nobody. But I just went there with no appointments made, nobody talking to anybody's assistant. I just showed up at New Line Cinema, which was the studio making the movie, and I was like, I'm Renny from Finland, and I want you to consider me to make this movie, and they just threw me out. But then, as I believe many times in life, you have to have a little bit of luck, and you kind of create that luck by being in the right place at the right time. And to my luck, the writers' strike, was it in 1987 or 1988? Big writers' strike started right then. New Line Cinema already had the release date for the movie. They had to make it, and they didn't have a script. They had a blueprint, but they didn't have a script. And so I started pounding them with storyboards. I was drawing storyboards of the nightmare sequences, which I was just coming up with. I would show up and say, like, look, I drew this sequence where all the characters, their faces are in a pizza, and somebody is eating the pizza. They'll be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And there's a naked girl inside the waterbed, and Freddy comes to life in a junkyard with the dog from hell, and all these things. And it was my opportunity to convince them that I had the imagination and ideas to make this work, even if they didn't have a script. And then they sort of gave up finally, and they were like, okay, this guy is so insistent and so passionate, and he has so many ideas that maybe then if we just somehow gobble together the character stories and everything else, then we have a movie. So it was really like if there had been no writer's strike, there's no way I would have gotten that job.
Wow.
Prison was a little horror movie. It wasn't bad, but it didn't get any attention. It didn't get a theatrical release. I had no credentials or no reason to get that job, but they took the risk because I wouldn't give up, and it worked out. And the movie turned out to work really well. Was very successful, and that just, as these Hollywood dreams sometimes go, it just changed everything overnight. And rest is history.
That's amazing that you came up with the pizza idea. That's one of the most memorable images from any of those movies.
Good, thank you.